Imagine boarding a flight meant to take you to the biggest moment of your career, only to be told you don't belong there. This is the story of Aliyah Brooks, a powerful CEO whose first-class seat was suddenly questioned, not because of any mistake, but because of the color of her skin. What happens when someone who has fought their entire life to break barriers faces discrimination in the most public and humiliating way possible? How does a woman with quiet strength and fierce determination respond when the system seems stacked against her? And what ripple effects can one stand against injustice create not just for one person, but for an entire industry? Set against the polished aisles of an international flight, this story is about dignity, resilience, and the fight for respect that every human deserves. It's a powerful reminder that prejudice can hide in the smallest moments, and courage can change the course of history. Are you ready to hear how one woman transformed humiliation into a catalyst for real change? Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now to join us on this journey and never miss a story that matters. The gleaming fuselage of the Skyline Airways Airbus reflected the soft glow of the late afternoon sun as it rested on the tarmac of Boulder Ridge International Airport. Inside, the cabin exuded an air of luxury and exclusivity. Plush cream leather seats stretched along the aisles, accented with polished mahogany armrests and subtle gold trim that caught the light in elegant flashes. The gentle hum of conversation mingled with the soft clinks of champagne glasses as passengers settled into their seats, preparing for the overnight flight to Tokyo. Among them was Aliyah Brooks, a woman whose presence seemed to command the room without demanding it. At 41, Aliyah carried herself with a quiet confidence born from years of hard work, sacrifice, and resilience. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, the fabric hugging her form with a refined elegance that spoke of professionalism and poise. Her dark eyes, framed by delicate glasses, held a steady calm, but beneath them burned an unmistakable fire, a resilience forged in the crucible of adversity. Aliyah had a seat reserved in the very front of the plane, row 2A. A first-class sanctuary that she had earned not by chance, but through decades of relentless dedication. As the CEO of Brooks Global Shipping, she was on the brink of securing a multi-million-dollar deal in Tokyo that could redefine the trajectory of her company. The trip was more than business. It was a symbol of the heights she had climbed despite the obstacles placed in her path from an early age. As she made her way down the aisle, a soft murmur rippled through the cabin. Most passengers barely spared her a glance. Some nodded politely, acknowledging her status without fanfare. But not everyone met her passage with such ease. Standing near the entrance of the first-class cabin was Emily Carter, a flight attendant with over 16 years of experience. Emily's blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her crisp uniform was pristine, yet her eyes narrowed slightly as Aliyah approached, betraying a flicker of suspicion beneath her professional smile. Emily stepped forward, her voice measured but firm. "May I see your boarding pass?" Ma'am. Aliyah paused, a subtle crease forming between her brows. "Of course," she replied smoothly, reaching into her leather handbag and producing the gleaming card embossed with Skyline Airways logo and her name printed in bold letters. Emily took the boarding pass and inspected it carefully, her gaze flicking between the card and Aliyah's composed face. "Row 2A. That's correct. Just routine," she said, handing it back without meeting Aliyah's eyes fully. Aliyah nodded and settled into her seat, unfolding the folder containing her presentation materials. The soft rustle of paper was a comforting rhythm, grounding her amidst the growing tension she could feel like a distant storm on the horizon. Minutes passed, the cabin lights dimmed, and the flight attendants began their pre-flight announcements. Aliyah glanced around, noting the diversity of the passengers from seasoned businessmen to families embarking on vacation. Yet, something felt off. Emily's occasional glances in her direction had not ceased, and a subtle chill had crept into the atmosphere. Then, the moment that changed everything arrived without warning. "Security! Get this woman out of here. Now!" The voice came sharply from the front of the cabin, unmistakably Emily's, raised loud enough for everyone to hear. The words carried an edge that sliced through the polite hum of the flight's ambiance like a knife. Aliyah looked up from her folder to see Emily standing near her seat. The smile wiped away, replaced by a hard, unyielding glare. "I'm going to ask you one last time to leave this seat, or I will have you removed." The cabin fell silent. Passengers turned their heads, their eyes wide with disbelief and curiosity. The flight attendant's tone was dripping with condescension, but Aliyah remained perfectly still, her expression the calmest anyone could have imagined in such a moment, holding her first-class boarding pass like a shield. Aliyah's voice was steady but unwavering. "I am not moving. I have a valid ticket for this seat. Please explain why you believe otherwise." A murmur rippled through the first-class cabin. Whispers floated between passengers, many of whom watched as if witnessing a scene from a drama unfolding in real time. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's been some confusion," she said, her voice tight. "We need to verify your credentials." Aliyah took a breath, a quiet strength settling deep inside her chest. "I've been flying first class with Skyline Airways for over 7 years. I am a Platinum Elite member. My company has a corporate contract with your airline. All my identification and documentation are valid." Emily's eyes flickered momentarily toward the passengers behind her, as if seeking approval for her next move. Without waiting for further discussion, she called out sharply for her supervisor. Rachel Grant, the station manager, appeared almost immediately. Her steps were brisk, her face a mask of professionalism, but there was a coldness in her eyes when she looked at Aliyah. "We need to verify your ticket wasn't fraudulently obtained," Rachel stated flatly, ignoring Aliyah's repeated offers of proof. The atmosphere thickened with tension. Rachel did not ask for explanations or even introduce herself properly. Instead, she assumed guilt before evidence was presented. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The businessman in 1A glanced over the top of his newspaper, frowning. A young couple in seats 3C and 3D whispered quietly, but stopped when they noticed the sharp tone of the confrontation. Someone in the back held up a phone, discreetly recording the incident. Aliyah remained composed. Her voice did not waver, though the cold knot of humiliation tightened in her stomach. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for. I am not a fraud." Emily's lips curled into a dismissive smile, her voice sharp. "This section is only for elite passengers, and you do not look like one." The words hung in the air like a slap. Aliyah's gaze met Emily's steadily. "Perhaps you should double-check your passenger list before making assumptions." The tension was palpable. Passengers exchanged glances, some whispering, others pretending not to notice. The social divide, invisible moments before, was now glaringly visible. At that moment, security was called. Officer Mark Reynolds arrived swiftly, his face set in an expression of authority. His eyes locked onto Aliyah, and in an instant, his judgment was made. "Ma'am, you need to step off the aircraft immediately," he ordered brusquely. "We can sort this out at the gate." Aliyah looked up calmly. "Officer, I have provided every form of identification. I deserve to be treated fairly." But her words fell on deaf ears. Mark's tone hardened. "You're disrupting the flight. You must leave now." The cabin was silent, save for the whispered gasps of the onlookers. Aaliyah stood slowly, gathering her briefcase and papers with deliberate grace. Her head remained high despite the eyes that followed her in a mix of shock, pity, and judgment. As she walked down the aisle, escorted by security, she knew that this moment was not just about her. It was about the countless others who had been made invisible, questioned, and cast aside simply because of who they were. She glanced back once more at the seat that was hers by right, and at the passengers who sat frozen in the uncomfortable silence. The flight doors closed behind her, and with them, the first act of a battle that was only just beginning. Aaliyah Brooks sat quietly in the airport lounge, the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of cups filling the background. Her eyes were distant yet focused as she stared out the large window at the runway, where planes taxied and took off into the fading light. It was hard to believe that just moments ago she had been forcibly removed from the very flight that was supposed to carry her to the biggest meeting of her life. She adjusted the cuff of her navy suit and took a slow breath. Inside, a tempest of emotions churned. Anger, humiliation, disappointment, but also an unyielding determination. These feelings had shaped her for as long as she could remember. Growing up in the heart of Detroit, in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams were often deferred, Aaliyah had learned early how to navigate adversity. Her childhood was marked by the steady rhythm of struggle and perseverance. Her mother, a woman of extraordinary strength, worked multiple jobs just to keep the family afloat, late nights, early mornings, and sacrifices unseen by most had forged the foundation for Aaliyah's resolve. The small apartment they called home was cramped and modest, but it was filled with hope and the promise of something better. From a young age, Aaliyah had been fiercely intelligent and relentlessly curious. School was her refuge and her battleground. Teachers noticed her potential quickly, but not everyone celebrated it. Sometimes she felt the weight of expectations not just to succeed, but to prove her worth in a world that often underestimated her. She remembered vividly the whispered doubts of classmates and the occasional sideways glance that spoke volumes about unspoken barriers. Despite all this, she excelled. Scholarships led her through college, internships opened doors, and a relentless work ethic carried her through early careers in shipping logistics. Each promotion was a small victory against the odds. Each deal closed a testament to her skills and grit. Today, as the CEO of Brooks Global Shipping, Aaliyah managed a multi-million-dollar enterprise with offices across the globe. She had built something lasting, not just for herself, but for her family and her community. But as she sat there in the luxurious airport lounge, the sting of what had just happened refused to fade. The humiliating encounter on the plane was a sharp reminder that no matter how far she had come, the world still saw her through a lens clouded by prejudice. Her assistant's phone buzzed insistently in her bag. Marcus was trying to reach her with updates on rebooking flights and the growing media storm. She ignored it for a moment, allowing herself a rare moment to reflect. She thought about the presentation she had meticulously prepared for months. It was not just a pitch for a business deal. It was a declaration of her company's vision for expansion into Asia. Success here would mean stability, growth, and a chance to open new doors for hundreds of employees. This flight was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. Now, instead of preparing for negotiations, she was forced to fight for basic dignity. Her phone finally lit up again. She answered with a steady voice, putting on the professionalism she had perfected over years in boardrooms. "Marcus." What's the latest? We're working on options. But the earliest flight we can get you on isn't until tomorrow evening, Marcus replied, his tone a mix of urgency and frustration. The executives in Tokyo are already concerned. Competitors are circling. Aaliyah nodded to herself, the pressure mounting but not breaking her resolve. Thank you. Keep me updated. As she ended the call, she glanced around the lounge and saw faces she had never noticed before, travelers lost in their own worlds, some absorbed in devices, others in conversation. None knew the full story behind the calm woman sitting among them. Yet, she was not alone. Aaliyah's mind drifted to the countless others who had suffered in silence. The employees of her company, many from minority backgrounds, had shared stories of microaggressions, subtle exclusions, and moments of doubt fueled by systemic bias. These experiences were threads woven into the fabric of their daily lives. She knew that confronting the airline was just the beginning of a larger battle. It was about confronting a culture that allowed such injustice to persist unchallenged. Her own experience was a mirror reflecting a much broader societal failure. The decision she made in that moment was clear. She would not be a passive victim. She would wield her voice, her resources, and her influence to demand change not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Yet, beneath the steely exterior, there was a flicker of doubt. Would the system listen? Would the powers that be acknowledge the depth of the problem? Could one woman truly spark a transformation in an industry entrenched in tradition and prejudice? These questions echoed quietly in the recesses of her mind, but she pushed them aside. She was no stranger to uncertainty. Every major step forward in her life had been accompanied by fear and hesitation. What mattered was action. Before long, she composed a message to her legal team outlining the incident and requesting immediate assistance. She directed Marcus to begin compiling all relevant documentation and prepare for a public response. Aaliyah closed her eyes briefly and allowed herself to imagine the meeting in Tokyo, the room filled with executives awaiting her proposal, the weight of expectation and possibility hanging in the air. She would get there. She would make them see. But first, she needed to ensure that no one else would face what she had endured on that flight. Her story was not just about a denied seat. It was a call to justice. As the airport lights dimmed with the approaching evening, Aaliyah's resolve shone brighter than ever. The battle ahead would be long and arduous, but she was ready, not just as a CEO, but as a woman determined to change the rules of the game. Emily Carter had been a flight attendant with Skyline Airways for more than 16 years. She took pride in her work, viewing herself as the guardian of the first-class cabin, where the airline's most important passengers were seated. Her meticulous attention to detail and adherence to protocol had earned her respect among colleagues and passengers alike. But over the years, a subtle unease had taken root in her perspective, an unconscious bias that quietly influenced her judgments. When Aaliyah Brooks first stepped onto the plane, Emily noticed something that didn't fit the mental image she had built of a typical first-class passenger. Not because Aaliyah was unworthy, but simply because of the deeply ingrained stereotypes she had internalized over time. Her mind flitted through assumptions, shaped by years of seeing a certain type of passenger in these seats: older white men in tailored suits, affluent couples on vacation, executives whose names were household brands. Emily watched Aaliyah's calm and poised demeanor, but still felt a nagging suspicion. This woman did not look like someone who typically occupied 2O. It was an unspoken thought that Emily immediately tried to dismiss. She reminded herself that it was just routine to verify boarding passes, nothing more. As Aaliyah made her way down the aisle, Emily approached with a practiced smile. her tone polite but firm. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" The brief exchange that followed seemed innocent enough to any outsider. Aaliyah handed over her card confidently. Emily studied it carefully, eyes narrowing slightly as she compared the name with the seating chart on her tablet. Row 2A. "Yes, that's right," she said, though the hesitation in her voice was barely perceptible, despite telling herself it was standard procedure. Emily's mind raced. She wondered how someone like Aaliyah, successful, powerful, and polished, could provoke such discomfort within her. There was a silent battle raging inside her, an internal conflict between her professional training and the biases she never fully confronted. Emily's thoughts drifted back to other passengers she had encountered over the years, those who looked different or came from backgrounds unlike her own, and how her suspicions had sometimes unfairly influenced her treatment of them. She recalled moments when she had questioned tickets or identities without real cause, moments that were brushed aside as caution, but in hindsight bore the stains of prejudice. But now, as she looked at Aaliyah, those old instincts seemed to amplify. She convinced herself she was just being thorough. "I need to double-check with my supervisor to verify your seat assignment," she told Aaliyah, forcing her voice to remain neutral. Aaliyah's expression did not change. There was no anger, no frustration, only a steady calm and quiet dignity. "I have been flying first class with Skyline Airways for over 7 years," she said. "I am a Platinum Elite member, and my company holds a corporate contract with your airline. Everything about my ticket and identification is legitimate." Emily hesitated, torn between the evidence before her and the assumptions in her mind. She called for her supervisor, Rachel Grant, her voice just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "There may be an issue with this passenger's ticket. I need confirmation." In the moments that followed, Emily could feel eyes turning toward them. Some passengers shifted uneasily. Others whispered to one another. She was painfully aware that the situation was no longer just about a routine verification. It was becoming a spectacle. She wished she could say she was proud of her actions, but deep down, she knew otherwise. Part of her resented the way her own fears and biases had steered her judgment. She also feared the consequences of stepping back and admitting she might be wrong. Her internal struggle was palpable. On one hand, Emily was trained to treat all passengers equally, with respect and professionalism. On the other, she was a product of her environment, shaped by societal narratives and unconscious prejudices that whispered doubts about those who looked different. As Rachel Grant approached, Emily felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Rachel's presence brought authority, but also hardened the situation. The station manager took one look at Aaliyah and seemed to make a quick decision without much consideration. Rachel's voice was clipped. "We need to verify that this ticket was not fraudulently obtained." "This is a serious matter," Aaliyah responded calmly, offering every form of identification with patience and clarity. "I am exactly who I say I am, and this seat is rightfully mine." But Rachel was unmoved. Her tone conveyed a preemptive judgment. "Security will be called to assist if necessary." Emily watched as the encounter spiraled beyond her control. The doubts that had plagued her turned into actions that would soon have irreversible consequences. Aaliyah, who had done nothing wrong, was now at the center of an escalating confrontation fueled by suspicion and bias. Later, when Emily reflected on the incident, she was haunted by a sense of guilt. She knew that her initial doubts had set in motion a chain of events that had humiliated a woman who deserved respect. It was a moment that forced her to reckon with uncomfortable truths about herself and the system she represented. Was her suspicion justified, she couldn't honestly say yes. It was a question that lingered, challenging her sense of fairness and integrity. The conflict within Emily mirrored a broader societal struggle, a struggle to overcome prejudice that often operates quietly, beneath the surface, influencing decisions in ways we don't always recognize. For Aaliyah, Emily's suspicion was a barrier she had to confront not with anger, but with unwavering dignity. For Emily, it was a call to confront her own biases and to recognize the human cost of letting those biases dictate actions. The flight was far from over, and so was the story of this unexpected confrontation. Rachel Grant moved through the cabin with purpose. As the station manager of Boulder Ridge International Airport for Skyline Airways, she was no stranger to tense situations, but the call she had just received put her in a delicate position. The young flight attendant, Emily Carter, had expressed serious concerns about a passenger's boarding pass, a passenger who was now sitting calmly but defiantly in seat 2A. Rachel knew the importance of maintaining order and protocol, but she also understood that decisions made in these moments could ripple far beyond the airport walls. Approaching Aaliyah Brooks. Rachel's expression was unreadable, a mask of professionalism that hid the storm brewing beneath. Without greeting or offering an introduction, she leaned slightly toward Aaliyah and said bluntly, "We need to verify that your ticket was not fraudulently obtained." Aaliyah looked up, meeting Rachel's gaze steadily. Her voice was calm, measured, and unwavering. "My ticket is valid. I am the CEO of Brooks Global Shipping. I have been a Platinum Elite member of Skyline Airways for years. I am sitting in the seat I purchased." Rachel's eyes flickered briefly to the boarding pass in Aaliyah's hand, then to the seat number on the cabin display above. Yet, the doubt lingered. Rachel had already made up her mind. The words she spoke next left little room for negotiation. "I will be calling security to assist. This situation needs to be resolved immediately." The atmosphere in the cabin thickened as whispers and exchanged glances intensified. Passengers felt the tension and shifted uncomfortably. Some tried to look away, unwilling to witness the unfolding drama. Others discreetly pulled out phones to record, anticipating the viral potential of such a confrontation. Rachel turned toward Emily, who was standing nearby, visibly tense but resolute. The two women exchanged a brief look, an unspoken agreement passing between them that they were on the same side. Aaliyah sat motionless for a moment, her breathing steady despite the storm around her. The years of practice in controlling her emotions were evident in the way she held herself upright, unbowed by the mounting pressure. Her mind raced behind the calm facade. This was not just a question of a ticket or a seat. It was an attack on her identity and her right to exist in spaces historically denied to people like her. Yet, she knew that to react with anger or despair would only give her adversaries more ammunition. Instead, she chose the power of dignity. As Rachel reached for her phone to make the call, Aaliyah spoke softly but firmly. "I have shown you every piece of identification you requested. My company has a corporate account with Skyline Airways. If you have doubts about my ticket, I ask that you check the records fully before making such accusations." Rachel's response was curt. "Procedures are procedures. Miss and Brooks, we are obligated to follow up on any suspicion of fraud. Please cooperate." The unyielding stance conveyed more than rules. It spoke of an institutional reluctance to challenge ingrained biases. Rachel was acting within the framework she knew. Yet that framework had flaws that marginalized and silenced voices like Aaliyah's. The tension escalated further when Officer Mark Reynolds arrived. His presence commanded immediate attention. His eyes scanned the situation, lingering momentarily on Aaliyah. There was an unmistakable weight in his gaze, a blend of authority and suspicion that seemed to bypass any initial presumption of innocence. Officer Reynolds addressed Aaliyah with a tone that brooked no argument. "Ma'am, you need to come with me to resolve this matter at the gate. We cannot have disruptions on the aircraft." Aaliyah's calm did not falter. "Officer, I have not disrupted anything. I am seated in my assigned seat. I ask that you review my identification and ticket before taking any action." But Officer Reynolds had already made his decision. His body language and clipped tone conveyed that further discussion was unnecessary. "Please gather your belongings and follow me." Passengers watched as the scene unfolded with a mix of shock and unease. Some exchanged looks that spoke of sympathy for Aaliyah, while others seemed relieved the confrontation was being handled. As Aaliyah rose, the weight of the moment settled heavily on her. She felt eyes on her back, some judging, some wondering, others perhaps reflecting on their own prejudices. The walk down the aisle was measured, deliberate. Her head was held high, every step a quiet defiance against the injustice being done. Outside the plane, the cool evening air was a stark contrast to the heated emotions inside the cabin. Aaliyah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. This incident was not just a personal affront. It was a symbol of the barriers that still existed for many in her community. But beneath the frustration, a resolve took root deeper than ever before. She would not allow this moment to define her or her legacy. Instead, it would fuel a fight for justice that extended far beyond this flight. As the doors closed behind her, sealing the plane's departure without her, Aaliyah knew the path ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to meet it with the same strength and grace that had brought her this far. Officer Mark Reynolds had been with Boulder Ridge International Airport Security for nearly a decade. His role was clear: to maintain safety and order, to respond swiftly to disruptions, and to enforce the rules without hesitation. Yet, beneath the uniform and badge was a man shaped by years of experience and biases, both conscious and unconscious. Tonight's call was routine on the surface, but the undercurrents made it anything but. When he arrived at the gate of Skyline Airways Flight 512, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily Carter and Rachel Grant briefed him quickly, emphasizing their suspicions about a passenger refusing to comply with instructions. Mark's eyes settled on Aaliyah Brooks, sitting with composed dignity but an unmistakable air of defiance. His initial impression was shaped by years of encounters where passengers claiming legitimacy were not always what they seemed. His training had taught him to be cautious, to err on the side of caution, but it also reinforced unspoken assumptions that tonight would clash with a truth far more powerful. "Ma'am, I need you to step off the aircraft immediately," Mark said firmly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "We will resolve this at the gate." Aaliyah looked up calmly, her gaze unwavering. "Officer, I have shown every form of identification required. I have not broken any rules. I ask that you review my documentation before making any decisions." Mark hesitated for a split second, enough for the gravity of her words to register. But the hesitation was swallowed by years of ingrained bias and protocol. "This is a matter of procedure. You are disrupting the flight. You need to comply now." The cabin was silent except for the low murmur of passengers watching the scene unfold. Some faces showed disbelief, others discomfort, and a few quietly recorded the incident on their phones. Aaliyah rose slowly, gathering her belongings with deliberate care. Each movement was a testament to her resilience. As she followed Officer Reynolds down the aisle, she caught glimpses of whispered conversations and furtive glances. The humiliation was real, but it did not break her spirit. Outside the plane, the cool night air seemed sharp against her skin. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the storm raging inside. She was not just fighting for her seat. She was fighting for recognition, respect, and dignity. Mark led her to a private area away from the main terminal, where more security personnel awaited. The conversation turned to verification of tickets and memberships, but the damage was already done. Aaliyah's flight was departing without her. As she sat in the sterile waiting area, the reality sank in. The meeting she had prepared for months was slipping further out of reach. The negotiations that could secure the future of her company were at risk. Competitors were circling, and her absence was a glaring vulnerability. Yet, amid the frustration, Aaliyah's mind was already racing ahead. This incident was bigger than one flight or one seat. It was a stark reminder of the barriers still faced by many in professional and social spaces. It was a call to action. She reached for her phone, contacting Marcus to relay the unfolding situation. Her voice was steady, but the urgency was clear. "We need to explore every option to get me to Tokyo. I'm not letting this define me or my company." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of calls, rebookings, and media inquiries. Marcus worked tirelessly to secure alternate flights, but the earliest departure was nearly 24 hours later. The delay was costly, both financially and reputationally. Meanwhile, social media had already picked up the story. Passengers' videos and accounts painted a vivid picture of the confrontation. Hashtags began trending, and news outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding controversy. Back at Skyline Airways headquarters, the incident triggered alarm bells. Executives scrambled to assess the fallout, balancing the need for damage control with internal investigations. The specter of a discrimination lawsuit loomed large. For Aaliyah, the situation was both a personal trial and an opportunity. She vowed to hold the airline accountable, not just for herself, but for all those who had suffered similar indignities. The fight was just beginning. Despite the setback, her resolve remained unshaken. Sitting in the waiting area, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection before launching into action. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to navigate it with the strength that had carried her through every challenge before. Aaliyah Brooks sat alone in a quiet corner of Boulder Ridge International Airport's lounge, the dim lighting casting soft shadows across her thoughtful face. The sterile hum of announcements and the distant chatter of travelers seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as her mind waged a fierce battle within itself. The humiliation she had endured just hours before still weighed heavily on her. Yet beneath that weight was a fire, a relentless drive that refused to be extinguished. She closed her eyes for a moment and allowed herself to feel the full spectrum of emotions, the anger that surged through her veins, the sting of injustice that threatened to unravel her composure, and the deep disappointment that settled in her chest. But she also recognized something else, something far more powerful: resilience. From a young age, Aaliyah had learned that anger could be both a weapon and a trap. It could fuel change or destroy opportunity. In this moment, she understood that how she chose to wield her emotions would define not just the outcome of this incident, but the path forward for her and countless others. Her mind replayed the confrontation on the plane, the sharp words, the dismissive glances, the unmistakable undertone of racial bias. She thought of Emily Carter, the flight attendant whose suspicion had sparked the chain of events, of Rachel Grant, the station manager whose rigid adherence to protocol had ignored the evidence, and of Officer Mark Reynolds, whose quick decision had sealed her fate on that flight. She wondered what had driven each of them to act as they did. Fear, habit, prejudice. And most importantly, Could they change? Alia's thoughts shifted inward as she confronted her own doubts. Would fighting back be worth the personal toll? Could one woman truly challenge a system so deeply entrenched in its ways? She had faced obstacles before, but this was different, more public, more painful. Yet, surrender was not an option. Drawing a deep breath, Alia began to map out her strategy. The legal team needed to be involved immediately. Documentation had to be precise and comprehensive. Media relations had to be handled carefully transparent, but controlled to avoid the narrative being hijacked or distorted. She reached for her phone and composed a detailed message to Marcus, her trusted assistant, outlining her intentions to pursue the matter with the full weight of her resources. Marcus responded promptly, his words steadying her resolve. "We'll gather everything you need. This isn't just about one flight, Alia. It's about changing the story for everyone." The thought brought a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. Her company, her community, and a growing movement for equality stood with her. But the weight of responsibility also pressed down. She was not just a CEO or a victim, she was a symbol now. Every step she took would be scrutinized, every word dissected. The pressure to be perfect, to remain composed under relentless public gaze, was immense. Alia thought back to her mother, who had taught her the value of dignity in the face of adversity. "You don't have to shout to be heard," her mother had said. "Sometimes, quiet strength speaks louder than any words." Those lessons fortified her. She resolved to channel her anger into purposeful action, to be a catalyst for change rather than a casualty of injustice. Her mind wandered to the faces of the employees at Brooks Global Shipping, many of whom had confided in her about their own experiences of subtle bias and exclusion. This fight was bigger than her. It was about paving a way so that those who came after would face fewer barriers. As she sat quietly, Alia began to sketch out plans for advocacy and outreach. She envisioned partnerships with civil rights organizations, the establishment of scholarships, mentorship programs, and initiatives to raise awareness about systemic discrimination. Yet, amidst the clarity of purpose, there were moments of vulnerability. She questioned if the system was ready to listen, if true change was possible, or if this would be yet another story swallowed by time. In those moments, she reminded herself of the countless pioneers who had stood against overwhelming odds. Their courage had shifted the course of history. Alia was determined to be one of those voices, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they did not belong. The night deepened outside the airport windows. Inside, the soft glow of the lounge lights illuminated Alia's face, marked by both weariness and an unbreakable resolve. She was ready to turn pain into progress. The airport terminal was unusually quiet for a Saturday evening. The steady stream of travelers had slowed, and the glow of the setting sun filtered softly through the expansive windows of Boulder Ridge International Airport. Amid the subdued bustle, Alia Brooks stood near the large glass pane overlooking the runway. Her eyes were fixed on the sleek silhouette of Skyline Airways Flight 512 as it began to taxi toward the runway, preparing for departure. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The distant roar of the engines filled the space, punctuated only by the quiet murmur of fellow travelers. Alia's gaze did not waver. She watched the plane inch forward, the moment it had been meant to board, now slipping further away from her grasp. The sight stirred a storm of conflicting emotions within her. There was the sting of rejection, not just of a seat or a flight, but of recognition, respect, and dignity. The humiliation of being forcibly removed from a place she had every right to be. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper, more potent feeling took root: determination. Her thoughts traced back to the confrontation on the plane, the icy gazes, the dismissive commands, the assumptions based on nothing more than appearances. It was a stark reminder of the barriers that remained, invisible yet impenetrable, for so many like her. Around her, the terminal moved on. Families reunited, business travelers hurried to gates, and friends embraced. Yet Aliyah felt suspended in a moment of profound stillness. The flight she had worked so hard to catch was now a symbol of a larger journey, one she was only just beginning. She could hear snatches of conversations nearby. Some whispered sympathies, others skeptical remarks. A businessman passing by muttered, "Why didn't she just move? If it's all legit, it should have been easy." Another woman shook her head slowly. "It's not that simple. People like her don't always get the benefit of the doubt." Aliyah knew those words well. They echoed the unspoken narratives she had battled against all her life, the assumptions that shaped how people saw her, often before they even heard her speak. But she refused to be defined by their doubts, pulling her coat tighter around her. She turned away from the window and moved toward the seating area. Her phone vibrated again. Marcus with another update. She accepted the call and listened carefully. The earliest flight available was 24 hours away, a delay that would ripple across contracts, meetings, and reputations. Yet even in this setback, there was resolve. Marcus's voice was calm but urgent. "We're exploring every option. This delay is serious, but we'll get you there." Aliyah nodded, speaking quietly but with purpose. "Thank you. Keep me informed." Ending the call. She let herself sit for a moment, the weight of the situation settling fully in. The plans she had meticulously crafted, the months of preparation, the promise of growth for Brooks Global Shipping, all now at risk. Yet, even in this crucible of disappointment, Aliyah found clarity. This was no longer just about a flight. It was about the right to exist in spaces where people like her had been historically excluded. It was about demanding justice in a world too often quick to judge and slow to understand. Her gaze drifted again toward the departure boards. Flight 5112 now showed departed in bold letters. The plane was already soaring miles above the clouds, carrying passengers to destinations and opportunities she was momentarily barred from reaching. But Aliyah was not defeated. Her story was gaining traction. Passengers had recorded and shared videos, and social media buzzed with hashtags calling out Skyline Airways for discrimination. News outlets began covering the incident, shining a spotlight on an issue that was too often ignored. She allowed herself a small, determined smile. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. Around her, the terminal lights dimmed as night approached. Travelers moved on, some oblivious to the quiet battle unfolding in plain sight. But Aliyah's presence there was a statement, a refusal to be erased. Her journey was no longer about a single flight. It was about paving the way for those who would follow. It was about turning pain into progress. The plane had taken off without her, but Aliyah Brooks was already preparing to take off in a far more significant way. Back in her hotel room overlooking the city skyline, Aliyah Brooks sat at her sleek glass desk, her laptop open and phone pressed to her ear. The events of the evening played over and over in her mind. But there was no time for despair. This was a moment to take control, to turn the humiliation she had endured into a catalyst for change. Her assistant Marcus was already in full motion. His voice crackled with urgency, but also confidence as he coordinated with the airline, her legal team, and media consultants. "Aliyah, we've started assembling all the documentation from the flight, the boarding passes, the security footage, eyewitness accounts. The social media response is already gaining traction." She nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see her. Good. We need a solid foundation. This isn't just about me or this flight. It's about systemic change. The legal team, a group of seasoned attorneys specializing in discrimination cases, were drafting letters demanding formal investigations and threatening legal action if Skyline Airways did not respond appropriately. Aaliyah knew that the airline's public relations team was already in damage control mode, but she wanted to be the one controlling the narrative. As she spoke with Marcus, she outlined her priorities: a public apology, a full internal investigation, policy reforms, and most importantly, commitments to prevent future discrimination. We're also exploring alternative flights, Marcus continued. The earliest commercial flight is nearly 24 hours from now, but I'm negotiating for a private charter as a last resort. Aaliyah allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The idea of a private flight was both practical and symbolic, a way to reclaim control over her journey and her dignity. After ending the call, Aaliyah switched her attention to her email inbox. Messages flooded in from colleagues, clients, and supporters. Many expressed outrage and solidarity, while others offered assistance. The outpouring of support reinforced her belief that her fight was resonating far beyond herself. She drafted a statement to share with the press, carefully balancing emotion with professionalism. Her words emphasized the need for accountability and change, making clear that while she sought justice for the incident, her goal was to help build a more inclusive future. Later that evening, she convened a video call with her executive team at Brooks Global Shipping. The mood was serious but resolute. Aaliyah shared the details of the incident and outlined the steps they would take, not only to manage the immediate crisis, but also to leverage their position as a leading minority-owned business to advocate for broader reforms. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable, she stated firmly. This is a moment for us to lead by example. We will support those who face injustice and push for real, measurable change. Her team responded with unanimous support. Ideas flowed about community outreach, partnerships with civil rights organizations, and establishing a scholarship fund to empower young leaders from underrepresented backgrounds. The next morning, Aaliyah met with her legal counsel to finalize their strategy. They planned to request all internal reports Skyline Airways had on similar incidents, seeking patterns of discrimination. The legal team stressed the importance of evidence and preparation. Knowing the airline would likely fight to protect its reputation, despite the mounting pressure, Aaliyah remained composed. She reminded herself that this was a marathon, not a sprint. Every step had to be calculated, every action purposeful. She thought about the young girl she once mentored, a bright student with dreams of becoming an aerospace engineer. That girl's future was part of what she was fighting for. Change had to be real and lasting. Throughout the day, Aaliyah's phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from journalists, activists, and industry leaders flooded in. The incident was rapidly becoming a national conversation about race, privilege, and corporate responsibility. As evening fell, she took a quiet moment to reflect. The pain of being denied a seat on a plane was sharp, but it paled in comparison to the larger fight for equality and respect. Aaliyah Brooks was determined to be more than a victim. She would be a voice for justice, a leader for change, and a beacon for those still searching for their place in a world too often divided. The tension was palpable in the sleek conference room at Skyline Airways headquarters. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of apprehension and urgency as key executives, legal advisors, and public relations specialists gathered around the polished mahogany table. On the large video screen, Aaliyah Brooks appeared calm and composed, her presence commanding the attention of every participant. Robert Sinclair, the CEO of Skyline Airways, sat at the head of the table. His usual confident demeanor was tempered by a visible edge of concern. The incident involving Aliyah had already sent shockwaves through the media and social networks. His company's reputation, one carefully cultivated over decades, now hung in the balance. "Ms. Brooks," Robert began, his tone respectful yet cautious. "I want to personally apologize for what happened on Flight 512. This situation is unacceptable and does not reflect the values we aspire to at Skyline Airways." Aliyah nodded, acknowledging the apology, but signaling that words alone were not enough. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair. I appreciate your recognition of the issue. However, apologies are only a first step. What matters now are actions and accountability." She proceeded to lay out a comprehensive list of demands, each one designed to address the systemic problems that allowed such an incident to occur. "First, I request a full, transparent investigation into this incident and any similar cases involving discrimination by your staff. This investigation must be conducted by an independent third party to ensure impartiality." Robert's legal counsel exchanged glances with the public relations team. The call for transparency was not easy, but unavoidable given the public scrutiny. "Second, Skyline Airways must implement mandatory, comprehensive bias training for all employees. This training should be developed and delivered by recognized experts in diversity and inclusion, with accountability measures in place." Aliyah's voice was steady as she continued. "Third, I expect clear, measurable goals for diverse hiring and promotion within your company. It is not enough to speak about inclusion. There must be tangible progress, especially in customer-facing roles and management." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her demands sinking in. "Fourth," she added, "a substantial donation to civil rights organizations, fighting discrimination and supporting minority-owned businesses. This is a gesture that signals your commitment beyond words." Robert Sinclair leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Ms. Brooks, these are significant requests. Our legal team will need time to review." "I understand," Aliyah replied, "but the time for hesitation is over. This is about protecting not just my rights, but those of countless others who face similar treatment daily." She paused, then delivered her final point. "Fifth, Skyline Airways must establish an independent civil rights ombudsman position. This person will have the authority to investigate complaints, recommend disciplinary actions, and report directly to your board of directors." The idea of external oversight was radical in an industry accustomed to internal reviews and limited accountability. Yet it was a necessary measure to rebuild trust. Robert nodded slowly. "These proposals will be considered with the seriousness they deserve." As the meeting progressed, Aliyah presented evidence collected from her legal team records of past complaints, video footage, and testimonies illustrating a disturbing pattern of racial bias within the airline's customer service operations. Emily Carter and Rachel Grant's names appeared repeatedly in the documents. The evidence painted a clear picture. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a systemic issue that had gone unaddressed. The PR team worried about the fallout, but recognized that genuine change was the only way to salvage the company's public image. Throughout the session, Aliyah remained composed, answering questions with clarity and focus. Her demeanor was a stark contrast to the defensive posture adopted by some executives. It was clear she was not there for confrontation, but for justice. After hours of discussion, Skyline Airways agreed to accept all of Aliyah's conditions. Robert Sinclair gave his personal assurance that the company would not only meet, but strive to exceed the outlined requirements. The agreement was historic, a turning point that sent a strong message throughout the airline industry. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in how discrimination was confronted and addressed. As the virtual meeting ended, Aaliyah allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The battle was far from over, but she had secured a critical victory. The power of one voice, backed by truth and determination, had forced a titan to reckon with its failings. 2 days later, Boulder Ridge International Airport buzzed with an unusual energy. Word had spread that Skyline Airways was making unprecedented efforts to mend its fractured reputation. The airline had arranged a private charter flight for Aaliyah Brooks, led by one of their most experienced captains, Isabella Ramirez. The move was not just practical, but symbolic, a clear message that change was underway. As Aaliyah arrived at the designated gate, she immediately noticed the difference. Ground staff greeted her with professional warmth and respect, a stark contrast to the cold dismissal she had experienced only days before. The gate agent personally ensured her check-in was smooth and flawless, guiding her through every step with genuine attentiveness. Captain Isabella Ramirez awaited Aaliyah at the aircraft door. With a confident smile and steady gaze, she extended a hand. "Ms. Brooks, I want to personally apologize for what you endured. It does not represent the values we hold, and I am committed to ensuring your experience today reflects that." Aaliyah accepted the handshake, sensing the sincerity in Isabella's voice. This was not just corporate damage control. It was a commitment from one professional woman to another. On board, the atmosphere was markedly different. Flight attendants briefed extensively on the situation and the importance of respectful service, engaged with Aaliyah and other passengers with genuine kindness and professionalism. There was no hint of suspicion, no uncomfortable glances, only a seamless dedication to excellence. As the plane ascended, Captain Ramirez made an announcement that caught the attention of the small group of passengers aboard the charter. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge that Ms. Aaliyah Brooks is traveling with us today after experiencing unacceptable discrimination on her previously scheduled flight. Skyline Airways is committed to treating all passengers with dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, or background. We are honored to provide Ms. Brooks with the service she should have received from the beginning." The gesture was small but powerful, a public acknowledgement of past failures and a promise to do better. Aaliyah settled into her seat, reviewing her presentation with a sense of calm she had not felt before. The journey was no longer just about business. It was about justice and progress. As the hours passed, the new flight crew demonstrated their commitment through every detail: attentive service, thoughtful gestures, and respectful interactions. The contrast was stark and undeniable. During the flight, Aaliyah reflected on the rapid changes Skyline Airways was implementing. The mandatory bias training was already underway, led by external experts with real accountability measures. The airline had set measurable goals for diverse hiring and promotions, ensuring minority representation at every level. The company's public donation to civil rights organizations was also a sign that words were being matched by actions. These groups were using the funds to support victims of discrimination and to educate communities on civil rights. Perhaps most importantly, the creation of an independent civil rights ombudsman was reshaping how complaints were handled. The ombudsman, reporting directly to the board, had the authority to investigate and recommend disciplinary actions, a level of oversight previously unheard of. Captain Ramirez herself had been involved in the airline's diversity initiatives for years and was passionate about fostering inclusivity in the skies. She shared with Aaliyah her own experiences as a Latina pilot breaking barriers in a traditionally male-dominated field. Their conversation was one of mutual respect and understanding. Both women recognized the importance of their roles in paving the way for others. The flight continued without incident. the hum of the engines a steady backdrop to Aaliyah's thoughts. This was more than a journey. It was a milestone in a broader movement toward equity and justice. As the plane approached Tokyo, Aaliyah felt a sense of hope. The path ahead would still be challenging, but today was proof that change was possible when courage met accountability. She looked out over the clouds, imagining the opportunities that awaited not just for her company, but for countless others inspired by her stand. The Reformation had begun, and with it, a new chapter for Skyline Airways and the industry as a whole. Months after the incident that had rocked Skyline Airways and propelled Aaliyah Brooks into the national spotlight, the impact of her courage was beginning to ripple far beyond the airport gates. Her fight for justice had become a beacon for countless individuals who had long endured discrimination in silence, and her influence was steadily reshaping industries and communities. Aaliyah found herself invited to speak at conferences, universities, and community events. Her story was not just one of personal triumph, but a call to action, a reminder that systemic change required both individual courage and collective effort. During one such visit to a community center in a modest neighborhood, Aaliyah met a young girl named Jasmine. Jasmine was 10 years old, bright-eyed and curious, with dreams as expansive as the sky itself. She wanted to be an aerospace engineer, fascinated by rockets and the mysteries of space. As they sat together, Jasmine confided in Aaliyah about the challenges she faced not just in academics, but in confronting the subtle doubts cast by those around her. "Some people say girls like me can't do science or engineering," Jasmine whispered. Aaliyah smiled warmly, remembering her own childhood doubts and the barriers she had faced. "Jasmine, those voices are wrong. Some of the brightest minds in history, many of them women and people who look like us, have changed the world through science and engineering. You can do this, and I will help you." Inspired by that meeting, Aaliyah had established the Brooks Legacy Scholarship Fund, named in honor of her mother. The fund aimed to provide not only financial support but also mentorship and internship opportunities for underprivileged students pursuing STEM fields. The scholarship was more than a financial gift. It was a promise to lift others up and to ensure that dreams were not limited by circumstances or prejudices. Meanwhile, Skyline Airways reforms had begun to bear fruit. The bias training programs became models for other airlines, their success documented in case studies and industry reports. Employee complaints of discrimination dropped dramatically, and customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers improved noticeably. The airline's commitment to diversity and inclusion was more than a public relations effort. It was becoming embedded in the company culture. Diverse hiring targets were met and often exceeded, and the Independent Civil Rights Ombudsman's office had already investigated several complaints, leading to disciplinary actions and systemic policy changes. Aaliyah's influence extended into legislative arenas as well. Her advocacy helped spur congressional hearings focused on discrimination in the travel industry. New guidelines were developed, emphasizing accountability and transparency, ensuring passengers' rights were protected across all major carriers. The ripple effect of her stand was profound. Small businesses owned by minorities, like many of Brooks Global Shipping's partners, received increased attention and support. Civil rights organizations that had received Skyline's donations expanded their programs, reaching more communities and providing critical resources. Even former adversaries found themselves changed. Emily Carter, the flight attendant who had initially doubted Aaliyah's right to her seat, reached out months later with a heartfelt letter. She spoke of her own journey through therapy and education, acknowledging the biases she had harbored and expressing gratitude for the accountability she had been held to. Rachel Grant had faced termination but used the experience to reevaluate her own beliefs. Now, she volunteered with community organizations, seeking to contribute positively to the very changes she once resisted. For Aaliyah, the greatest victory was not in the punishments meted out, but in the transformation sparked. She understood that change was ongoing and required vigilance, but the progress made gave her hope. As she walked through a bustling airport months after the incident, she noticed a young girl sitting in the coach section with her grandmother. The girl's wide eyes were fixed on the first-class cabin, filled with wonder and curiosity, the same wonder Aaliyah once carried. Approaching gently, Aaliyah introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Aaliyah." "What's your name, Jasmine?" the girl replied shyly, looking up at the elegant woman with a mixture of awe and excitement. Aaliyah smiled. "Would you like to see the first-class cabin? I'd love to show you around." With the grandmother's nod of approval, Jasmine's face lit up as she followed Aaliyah, stepping into a world that once seemed out of reach. As they toured the spacious seats and amenities, Aaliyah shared stories of perseverance, dreams, and the importance of believing in oneself. Jasmine listened intently, her dreams growing brighter with every word. That day, Aaliyah wasn't just a CEO or an advocate. She was a mentor, a role model, and a living testament to the power of standing up for what is right. The ripple effect of one woman's courage continued to spread, touching lives, inspiring futures, and shaping a more just and inclusive world. Nearly a year had passed since that fateful night at Boulder Ridge International Airport, when Aaliyah Brooks had been denied her rightful place on Flight 512. What had begun as a deeply personal humiliation had transformed into a powerful movement for change. And now, standing at the crossroads of reflection and hope, Aaliyah could truly appreciate the magnitude of her journey. The months had been relentless, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and intense advocacy. But through it all, Aaliyah had remained steadfast. Her quiet strength had become a beacon for many, a testament to the power of dignity in the face of injustice. Today, as she walked through the modern halls of a business conference in Chicago, she felt the familiar hum of excitement mixed with purpose. The room was filled with leaders, activists, and innovators, all gathered to discuss progress in diversity and inclusion across industries. Aaliyah had been invited to speak as a keynote, her story now emblematic of the fight against systemic discrimination in corporate America and beyond. Before stepping onto the stage, she took a quiet moment backstage, looking at the photo of her mother that she always carried, a reminder of where she had come from and the legacy she wished to build. When her name was announced, she walked confidently to the podium. The applause was warm, sincere, and long. She looked out over the audience, seeing faces of all ages and backgrounds, united by a shared vision of justice and equality. Her speech was heartfelt, weaving personal anecdotes with calls for collective action. She spoke of that night at the airport not to relive pain, but to illuminate the need for systemic change. She highlighted the reforms at Skyline Airways, the growing legislative efforts, and the inspiring stories of those who had found strength through her journey. But perhaps most moving was her message to the next generation. "I stand here today not just for myself, but for every young person who has ever been told they don't belong," she said. "To the Jasmines and destinies of the world, I want you to know that your dreams are valid, your potential is limitless, and no one has the right to deny you your place in this world." Her words resonated deeply, a reminder that change begins with one voice willing to stand up and speak out. After the conference, Aaliyah returned home to Detroit, where she continued to nurture the Brooks Legacy Scholarship Fund. The fund had blossomed, supporting dozens of students pursuing careers in business, STEM, and leadership. Mentorship programs connected recipients with industry professionals, creating pathways that once seemed impossible. One afternoon, as she reviewed applications for the scholarship, a letter caught her eye. It was from Jasmine, the young girl she had met months ago at the community center. Jasmine wrote about her progress in school, her excitement about a science fair project, and her gratitude for the scholarship's support. Her words were filled with hope and determination, a testament to the ripple effect of Aaliyah's courage. Aaliyah smiled, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. This was the true legacy she had fought to create, not just for herself, but for generations to come. Meanwhile, Skyline Airways had become a case study in corporate transformation. The airline's commitment to diversity was no longer just a policy on paper, but a living, breathing culture shift. Employee feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and passenger experiences had improved dramatically. Even Emily Carter and Rachel Grant's stories had taken unexpected turns. Both women had embarked on journeys of self-reflection and growth, using their experiences to educate others and advocate for inclusivity. Aaliyah had accepted an invitation to collaborate with them on a new initiative aimed at helping airline staff confront and overcome unconscious biases, a project born out of pain but driven by hope. As she reflected on the journey from that painful night to this moment of progress, Aaliyah understood that the fight against discrimination was ongoing. There would always be obstacles, setbacks, and difficult conversations ahead, but she also knew that the power of one voice, one act of courage, could change the course of history. In the quiet of her office, surrounded by mementos of her journey and the faces of those she had helped, Aaliyah Brooks felt a deep peace. Her story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. The path she had carved was wider, stronger, and brighter for those who would follow. And as she looked toward the future, Aaliyah knew this was only the beginning of a legacy that would endure. Aaliyah Brooks' story is more than just an account of discrimination. It's a powerful testament to the strength it takes to stand tall in the face of injustice. Her courage opened doors not just for herself, but for countless others who face similar battles every day. Yet, it also forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that prejudice still exists in spaces where it should have no place. We honor Aaliyah's journey by refusing to accept discrimination in any form and by committing to respect, dignity, and inclusion for all. This story reminds us that change often begins with one voice willing to say enough, and that standing up for what is right is never easy, but always necessary. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage and justice to light. Stay with us for the next video, where we continue to explore real stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift. Together, we can build a world where everyone belongs.